everyone, welcome back to the channel. Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, doesn't have many allies left after his disastrous invasion of Ukraine alienated him and his country from much of the world community. And even the few friends Putin can still call on, like North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, are proving themselves to be rather unreliable. Recent news reveals that Kim may have played Putin for a fool, supplying the Kremlin war machine with old, outdated, and rotting ammunition that has begun to backfire on Russian troops along the front lines. It's more bad news for Putin and a sign of how far Russia has fallen in the global community that it is having to resort to such desperate measures just to keep this doomed and wasteful conflict going. Before the war began, Russia may not have been the most popular nation on the planet, but it, at least, had strong influence around the world, and Putin could count on relatively solid bonds with various other nations and leaders. Then he made the misjudgment of a lifetime, invading Ukraine and turning large parts of the international community against him in the process. Dozens of countries have since condemned Russia's invasion and illegal occupation of Ukrainian territories, with many calling out the Kremlin's war crimes, and much of the Western world, in particular, punishing Russia with wave after wave of economic sanctions. Numerous nations have also, effectively, severed whatever ties they had with Moscow, ripping up trade agreements and so on. A number of nations have, however, stood by Russia throughout the war. It's not a large number. Indeed, the world got an accurate look at just how small Putin's friend circle had become back in February of 2023, when a United Nations resolution called for an ending of the war in Ukraine and demanded Russia's immediate withdrawal from the country. Almost every single country voted in favor of the resolution, with just Russia, Belarus, Syria, North Korea, Mali, Nicaragua, and Eritrea voting against. Even countries that were once relatively close to Russia, like some of the Central Asian nations that have, for years, relied on their ties with Moscow to survive, have begun turning their backs on Putin. Others have continued to invest in Russian resources, like China and India, which have become the two biggest buyers of Russian oil in recent times, but very few have been willing to provide actual military assistance to the Kremlin's forces on the ground. North Korea is the outlier. It has been vocal and outspoken in its diplomatic support for Russia even before the 2022 invasion, becoming one of only a small number of nations around the world to officially recognize Crimea as belonging to Russia back in 2017. Several months into the war, North Korea also recognized the so-called People's Republics of Luhansk and Donetsk, which are both Ukrainian territories, as independent states under Russia, prompting Ukraine to cut diplomatic relations with Pyongyang. Then, North Korea started to take its support even further, progressing from mere words and messages of support to full-on arms deliveries and troop deployments. It has sent everything from M1989 Coxswain self-propelled howitzers and M1991 multiple rocket launcher systems to thousands of North Korean troops, including special forces units, demining specialists, and construction workers to help rebuild infrastructure in the Kursk region after Ukrainian troops briefly occupied parts of the area. In short, North Korea has been one of the most active of Russia's allies throughout the conflict so far, and some of its most important contributions have come in the form of ammunition. No country can wage war successfully without ammo. Even with the strongest tanks, the fanciest fighter jets, the biggest brigades, and the most state-of-the-art equipment, every army needs this most essential of supplies, and there are many examples throughout history of entire offensives falling apart due to frontline troops simply not having ammunition in sufficient quantities to survive. And ammo has been of particular importance in this conflict, as Russia has relied on the power of attrition as a way to wear down Ukraine's defensive lines. It has repeatedly bombarded its opponent with countless drone swarms, bombing runs, artillery attacks, and frontline assaults, expending enormous amounts of ammunition day in and day out to deal as much damage as possible, and Pyongyang has played a huge role in that. Indeed, according to expert estimates from South Korea, North Korea sent over 13,000 shipping containers containing munitions to Russia over the course of a 2-year period from mid-2022 through to mid-2024, which would be equivalent to around 6,152,000 artillery shells. The South Korean Defense Intelligence Agency commented at the time, "To prepare for a prolonged war in Ukraine, Russia has moved to formalize North Korea as a supply base for weapons and ammunition." Even more recent figures, however, tell a slightly different story. According to Vadim Skibitsky, the deputy chief of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, North Korea has supplied around 5 million artillery shells to Russia since 2023, but supplies are starting to dramatically decrease. Speaking with Reuters, the deputy chief noted the amount of North Korean ammo entering Russia in 2025 has declined by around 50% compared to what it was in 2024. He added that there wasn't even a single recorded shipment in the entire month of September, and while some deliveries resumed in October, the overall numbers are a lot lower than they have been in the past. There are several possible explanations for this, but two reasons stand out as being the most likely. First, North Korea is, quite simply, running out of ammo to send. Back in 2022, the country was reported to have vast stockpiles of Soviet caliber shells and other supplies, so had little trouble sending vast shipments to Russia in order to help fuel its war effort in Ukraine. There were also reports of numerous North Korean military factories suddenly operating at maximum capacity to manufacture more munitions for the Kremlin cause. Bit by bit, however, those stocks have been depleted, and it's hardly surprising, since Russia has been so reliant on its brute force strategy in a bid to wear down Ukraine's defenses all along the front lines and beyond. In late 2022, for example, Russia was firing an average of 20,000 artillery shells per day, and Moscow reportedly set a target of launching around 5 million each year in order to give itself the best chance of winning the war. Those kinds of numbers are simply not sustainable, even for a country the size of Russia that has long ranked as one of the most powerful military superpowers on the planet. Indeed, statistics also show that Russia can only make around 3 million shells each year, so it was effectively forced to turn to North Korea to have any hope of getting close to its 5 million target. For a time, Pyongyang was able to meet Moscow's needs, but the longer the war goes on, the harder it becomes to keep those supply lines going. The second reason why North Korea's ammo deliveries to Russia may be on the decline could be because Pyongyang may simply have other, more pressing matters to focus on. Not long ago, North Korea's military unveiled its latest and allegedly greatest intercontinental ballistic missile, the Hwasong-20, which is said to be capable of traveling up to 300 miles 15,000 kilometers and striking any location within the United States. The country has also been carrying out multiple missile tests in recent times, while also actively pursuing numerous military research and development projects. Skibitsky revealed to Reuters, for example, that North Korea has recently been working on expanding its drone production capabilities and has, in fact, begun mass production of 2 different types of drones: short-range FPV drones and larger, medium-range attack drones. It may be, therefore, that making and sending more shells to Russia has slowly slipped down Pyongyang's list of priorities. For all of Kim's boasting and bluster, North Korea is not a large or wealthy nation, and it does not have the same sorts of resources as a major global power. It has to allocate its resources carefully, and the country's military leaders may feel that they simply need to focus more of their manpower on other tasks. Either way, whatever the reasoning behind it, the end result is the same. Russia is getting fewer and fewer North Korean munitions. And that's a big problem as far as the Kremlin is concerned, because if Russia wants any hope of winning this war, it is going to need massive amounts of munitions, and it cannot make enough on its own. So, if the shipments from Pyongyang continue to dry up, the Kremlin will rapidly run out of options, as it doesn't have other allies that have shown the same sort of willingness to support it as North Korea has. That, in turn, will mean fewer ammo supplies rolling out to important positions along the front lines. Artillery teams and mechanized brigades will no longer have the ammunition they need to keep up their attacks on Ukrainian positions, and the Kremlin's commanders will have to rewrite their tactical plans with these new ammunition deficits in mind, perhaps reducing the frequency or intensity of some of their offensives or easing off in certain areas, in order to dedicate more of their remaining ammo to the most important strategic locations. This could open up new opportunities for Ukraine to launch counter-offensives or to regroup, resupply, and fortify its defensive lines or even recapture lost patches of land in certain regions where Russian ammunition is seen to be running low. In short, this decline in supply is likely to be a crippling blow for the Kremlin's war machine. And it's not just an issue with the quantity of North Korean ammunition, but its quality, too. According to Ukrainian intelligence reports, nearly half of the shells supplied by North Korea to Russia are so old and unreliable that Russia has to refurbish them at their own facilities, rather than sending them straight to the front lines. That's not what Russia wants. Ideally, the Kremlin's commanders would want to receive shipments from Pyongyang and send them straight on to key front-line locations, ready to be launched at enemy strongholds and defensive positions without any delay. Instead, every time a new batch of ammo enters the country from North Korea, teams of workers are essentially having to carry out quality control checks, verifying if the shells are even in a usable state, with many of them then having to be diverted to Russia's own military facilities to undergo improvements before finally making their way to the front. So, not only is Russia having to spend money to buy these shells in the first place, but it's also then having to use up more of its time, money, and resources to make sure they're ready to deploy. What's more, many of the shells that are deemed good enough to go straight to the front lines still end up being worthless duds, as noted by Ukrainian political analyst Olna Kryzhenevska in a 2024 report. Russia encounters problems with the increase of domestic production of weapons and ammunition, such as a shortage of skilled labor. For instance, Uralvagonzavod, a tank producer, took on 250 convicts from a nearby prison to close the labor gap. Additionally, Russia uses quite a lot of munitions from its allies, particularly Belarus, Iran, and North Korea. Reportedly, North Korea may have shipped the equivalent of around 3,152mm artillery shells since August last year, and its factories are operating at full capacity. At the same time, Ukrainian defense officials reported that around 50% of shells shipped to Russia from North Korea are faulty. This whole story is a humiliating indictment of Russia's military standing in the world today. It's supposed to be one of the most powerful military superpowers in the world, boasting a gigantic army, thousands of tanks, tens of thousands of armored infantry vehicles, beating missiles, artillery, and air defenses, and huge air and naval forces, too. For decades, countries across the globe were terrified at the very thought of a possible conflict with the mighty Russian war machine. Now, however, the myth of the Russian army is unraveling before our eyes. Not only is Russia still struggling to make any notable gains on the ground in Ukraine and overcome a much smaller opponent, but it's even resorting to such desperate, embarrassing measures as buying old, broken ammo from one of the only allies it has left. And, like so many other elements of Putin's war, this situation with North Korean ammunition is entirely unsustainable. Firstly, as stated earlier, Pyongyang will not be able to keep on shipping millions and millions of artillery shells and other munitions to Russia indefinitely. It doesn't have the stockpiles, nor does it have the resources or production capacity, as proven by the fact that shipments are already becoming smaller and more sporadic. Secondly, even if North Korea continues to find ways to send at least some shells to Moscow, many will continue to be completely defective. That means Russia will need to waste more of its own time and resources bringing these shells up to scratch, or simply send them to front-line brigades and hope that they work. Unfortunately for Russia, it doesn't have much other choice. It has a couple of other allies, like Belarus and Iran, willing to help out with some supplies and resources, but there isn't exactly a huge queue of countries desperate to fuel Putin's war effort. So Russia will either have to put up with North Korea's F-grade ammo or somehow try to win a war with only a fraction of the munitions it needs. Over in Pyongyang, meanwhile, Kim Jong-un is probably quite content with how the war has worked out for him. While many countries have criticized North Korea for getting involved in the war and siding with Russia, the former South Korean ambassador to Russia, Lak, claims that Kim's decision to team up with Putin has proven to be not a bad deal at all, as far as Pyongyang is concerned. Why went on to explain that North Korea officially claims to produce around 4 million tons of grains, including rice, barley, and wheat, each year, but much of its so-called rice production is actually made up of potatoes, leaving the country dangerously short on one of its most staple foods. The 4 million tons of grains that North Korea says it produces per year are actually about 1 million tons short of what it needs to feed the country. If Russia is offering 600,000 to 700,000 tons of rice, that is enough to cover more than half of what North Korea would need to meet the year's demand. He went on to note that while North Korea had faced a food shortage crisis not too long ago, much of that has most likely been relieved thanks to its deals with Russia. By selling a few containers worth of artillery shells, Pyongyang can afford a lot more than hundreds of thousands of tons of rice. Why also feels that Kim Jong-un may now feel that he's done so much to support Russia. He should be able to count on Putin to return the favor if and when war breaks out with South Korea. North Korea is on record as having fought for Russia. If there ever is a war on the Korean peninsula, North Korea can now expect Russia to come and help. That remains to be seen, but there's no doubt that the Russian-North Korea alliance is set to continue into the foreseeable future. As Skibitsky revealed in his Reuters interview, North Korean officials have kept a close eye on events in Ukraine and tried to learn as much as they can from the conflict. More specifically, Pyongyang has been closely studying Russia's use of drones to attack its opponent and is applying that knowledge as it begins to build its own drone production facilities. While we don't yet know the kinds of quantities of drones that North Korea is making, it's certainly possible that the country could provide a substantial number of UAV to Russia, which could, in theory, make Moscow's swarms even bigger and perhaps deadlier. At the same time, if half of North Korean artillery shells are defective, it's easy to imagine how the country's drones might also prove unreliable and potentially problematic for Russia to work with. The Kremlin may end up once more on the losing side of this arrangement, investing in basic, broken drones that it then has to spend more time and money repairing and upgrading before they can be classified as combat-ready. In the meantime, Russia is also getting ready to welcome around 12,000 North Korean workers before the end of 2025. These laborers will take up positions at enterprises around the Alabuga Special Economic Zone in Tatarstan, which is where Russia makes a large percentage of the drones it uses to attack Ukraine, as revealed in a recent telegram post from the Ukrainian Main Directorate of Intelligence (HUR). By the end of 2025, the aggressor state of the Russian Federation plans to attract about 12,000 North Korean workers to work at the enterprises of the Alabuga Separate Economic Zone in Tatarstan. It is in Alabas that long-range drones of the shaded/Geran type are manufactured, with which the Russian army carries out terrorist attacks on the civilian infrastructure of Ukraine. To discuss the details of the sale of labor, at the end of October, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs held a meeting between local government officials and representatives of the North Korean company, Jong Technology Trade Company, responsible for the search and selection of Korean workers. Muscovites promised to pay imported laborers approximately $2.50 per hour of work, and shifts for workers will last at least 12 hours. Such measures indicate deepening strategic cooperation between the two dictatorships to continue the aggressive war against Ukraine. It's certainly worrying to see bonds growing stronger between two of the world's most volatile powers. But there's only so much that North Korea can actually do for Russia, and a few more batches of broken ammo aren't exactly going to make a massive difference on the ground. Ukraine, meanwhile, can continue to count on a far broader and more powerful collection of allies across the Western world, including the United States and the nations of the European Union, providing funds, arms, ammo, intelligence, and more. The US even recently showed just a little sliver of its strength right at Russia's doorstep, which you can learn more about in this video. Or, for a more in-depth look at how the war is progressing and how Ukraine is turning the tide, watch this video, which explores some of the core reasons why Putin still refuses peace and may feel that he has no other option but to keep the conflict going or risk the collapse of his entire regime. Remember to subscribe to our channel too, if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you can remain informed and up to date on everything that's happening in the Russian-Ukraine war and other important conflicts across the globe. Thank you for watching. And stay tuned because the story of modern Russia is far from over.